Apple could show a new trend not seen since the Great Recession. Apple, it's seems to be trending down a little bit here. This particular article on Seeking Alpha is looking specifically at the operating margin, Apple's operating margin, which they've been tracking. Obviously, there's data on this over a long period of time, and they seem this particular site, this is a financial sort of a, what do you call it, Will? Stock advice type website. Mm-hmm. Eventually, the guy's conclusion here is that he thinks you should sell your Apple stock.
Now.
I believe that's the official line for now. Let's see what the line says exactly here. Apple has reported an operating margin decline in 13 of the last 14 quarters. There's a high probability that Apple will show another quarter of OPM decline as the tariffs hurt the customers' sentiments. Apple is facing significant challenges in the App Store, which is highly profitable revenue stream, and its OPM is likely to fall below 20% in June. I have a sell rating for the stock. So one of the things I didn't actually know this prior to reading this particular article. Apple, the way that I knew how their App Store revenue structure operated, but I didn't know the scale of it. And so the biggest example in this particular article is in relationship to Netflix. So Netflix recently removed the App Store as a valid payment option for paying for your monthly subscription. A lot of people who would sign up to Netflix, I would never sign up to Netflix this way, so that's part of the reason I didn't think about it. But a lot of people who would sign up to Netflix would just have the automatic payments coming through the App Store. So they would download the app on the Apple App Store and somehow sign up in such a fashion where they would be billed through their credit card credentials that were tied to the actual App Store, instead of putting the credit card credentials directly into Netflix's payment processor. Well, what this amounts to is Apple getting their portion, their margin of App Store revenue, which I believe is around 30%. Now, Netflix is not a small company, Will. Netflix, huge customer base and a huge monthly revenue stream. So what it used to represent for Apple, and this is the part that absolutely shocked me here. Let me just see if I can find the actual piece. Importance of the App Store right here. Netflix grossed $853 million on the iOS App Store in 2018. That would directly give Apple $256 million in revenue. And this is the type of revenue, Will, that's just like set it and forget it. That's the Ronco revenue.
It's really passive.
That's the Ronco revenue. That's the rotisserie chicken revenue. You understand? That's the type you look for.
Delicious.
Yeah! It's spinning around. It's cooking in its own juices.
Juicing it up.
That's the type of revenue you're looking for. You just hit the button, you go take a break. You go sit on the couch, you put your feet up. You got the Ronco in the background. You just smell the flavor. You just start to smell it cooking. That's the type of revenue everybody wants. The services revenue, set it and forget it revenue. So this is just people having their credit cards connected to the apps. Of course, Apple's going to have their own payment processing costs to a degree, but it ain't going to be 256 out of the 256 million they collected. Mm-hmm. That's just an Apple tax right there. That's just, hey, hit us with that big number. And so Netflix obviously is like, wait a sec. We're giving you guys 256 million out of our 853 million for doing what? For just collecting the money? Jeez. Hey now. That's what they said. They said that ain't right. So Netflix demolished it. They got rid of it. What was the official line on it? Netflix said, they just said we're done with you. The removal of Netflix from the App Store would reduce Apple's margin by 12 basis points. So Netflix wants your credit card directly within the app. So does Spotify. And I believe Spotify is another big one on a similar scale. And Spotify actually has a class action or some an antitrust complaint against Apple's restrictions in the App Store. It's looking to process its own payments as well. And increasingly, as the successful apps and services that we pay the most money to as they increasingly rely on the App Store processing less and less because they don't need necessarily those new introductions to the app to the same degree, they're going to say, hey, we're not happy with the amount of money that you're taking, or we're going to just process the payments ourselves. And as that happens, this like super easy revenue stream, it shrinks, it evaporates for Apple, and therefore their operating margin takes this big hit. And so the concept here is that the glory days, the golden days, are gone. They're ending. That easy money, that Apple tax is evaporating, the ability to charge it. Much in the same way that like the music aspect got disrupted, where iTunes was like the mega location to consume music, and then all of a sudden streaming was like, nah. And all of a sudden it required a complete reworking, and Apple didn't want to let it go. And of course not, because they were, even in that case, I believe 30%. They're getting 30% of every single. So the App Store is a very similar model in that way to what iTunes previously was for music.
So how would you get the Netflix app without an app store?
No, you would get the Netflix app, but then within the app you'd put your credit card info, as opposed to starting a subscription via the App Store. Yeah.
I get it.
It's a different type of subscription. And it's the same thing that Spotify's talking about. They say people should be allowed to download our app and then set up their payment credentials directly with us. We should be able to bill them directly.
Yeah.
And that's precisely what the argument's about. So that looks to be the direction things are going to go in. I mean, you can look at the charts here. You can head to this website if you choose to, but what you will see is that operating margin decline consistently taking place. And of course, Apple, they have their very own projects attempting to make their moves around this stuff. They're launching all these new services in an attempt, of course, to increase that operating margin. But it's going to be tough to make up for these big chunks of money that they've become accustomed to receiving in exchange for what people call the App Store Apple tax going on. So anyhow, this guy says it's a sell rating. It's up to you. I mean, Apple's still Apple. I suppose it depends on how long you're planning on holding that particular investment for. But I think for this particular audience, the tech audience, it's interesting to get a little insight into how that App Store operates and how different it is, what it means for where and how you choose to make your payments to your subscriptions. Mm-hmm. Like if you just know that if you click that button to subscribe through the App Store, Apple just got 30% of your subscription fee. You got to decide if you want to send it that way, or if you would prefer to send it to Spotify directly, in which case you would give them your credentials as a customer.
Doesn't Apple just shouldn't they hit some sort of
Cut?
Because you're watching Netflix on an iOS device. They put all the R&D into iOS, made iOS.
So Kirk's making the argument right now that Apple deserves a cut
because it's on their platform.
The argument that Spotify is making is like, yeah, let's figure out what a fair cut is, because it's not 30%. Right. And of course, on the flip side, on the Android side, it doesn't exist. So they're like, well, Google doesn't need it. Access is important, but you could make the argument in the flip side that it's Spotify and Netflix that make your phone good. Like if you don't have any apps on your phone, how good is it? So in a way, they add value to the hardware, because now you want the new iPhone with the bigger screen because you have Netflix or YouTube. Like if you can't watch video on your new smartphone, why do you need to buy the latest iPhone? It goes both ways. It's a relationship. So they got to sort it out and figure out what the right makeup is.